It is time for us to get started. Glad that you are here. As always, there's one thing about it. Those of us that come on Wednesday night, we all like to talk, don't we? We have a good time. And those of you that are not coming, I realize some are unable to. But if you're at home and you can be here, this is a good place to be. Always good for us. It's good for the church. As a body, it's also good for our influence in the community. So please keep that in mind. Our next service will be Sunday. So Sunday at 10 o'clock, we hope that everybody can be here for a Bible study. We still have a lengthy list of those who we're praying for. Freddie Brewer at home, still not doing the best in the world. Charlie Vandergrift's here. He's got that little heart monitor on, so they're sort of checking him out. Brendan Jones taking his cancer treatments, along with Jenny Stooksbury also. She's in Nashville. I don't know where Brendan's taking his at. Anybody know? I assume Chattanooga. But anyway, Kim Ensley did get to come home. She's very, very happy to be home. She's a ways from being well, but she is much, much, much better. And she thanks everybody for cards and thoughts and prayers. Nancy Marler is still in Memorial Hospital, room 304. Today was a little rough day, but that's part of it. You have your goods and bad days, but she is healing, it seems, and doing better. Angela's mother-in-law, Miss Janelle Davis, had surgery last week. She's going to have more surgery Wednesday. They found a lymph node, I guess, that they want to look at. So please keep her in your thoughts. Carrie Reed, she did have the one surgery where they put in the pump for the muscle spasms that she was having. So that's behind her. She is doing better each day. Again, still a long ways to go. Sebring Angel is at home. Not moving real fast, but he is moving. Then extend our sympathy, of course, to the family of Crocia Elder. She passed away yesterday morning about 9 o'clock. The funeral will be at Bilbrey's in Crossville Saturday. Visitation from 12:30 to 2. That's Central Time. So 1:30 to 3 if you want to get your Eastern Time down. Also, Miss Barbara Malden did pass away this past week, and her funeral is Saturday at 12. I think they're having visitation tonight and tomorrow night as well. Movie night is tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, so keep that in mind. Sunday will be the Silver Saints potluck. We want to do some planning and thinking about what we can do and can't do. So if you want to stay and bring food and eat with us and get in on that, again, the Silver Saints is a little bit deceiving. But if you want to be a part of it, you are welcome to be a part of it. Somebody had put some oranges out here by the blessing box. They're probably going to freeze. So if you want an orange, you can get you one as you go out the door. The blessing box seems to be working pretty good. Oh, I think that's everything. Ryan has our singing. Spencer Strickland has our prayer. Matthew has our devo.
Begin with number 652. Under thee, O Lord, 652. Unto thee, O Lord, do I lift up my soul. Unto thee, O Lord, do I lift up my soul. Oh, my God, I trust in thee. Let me not be ashamed, let not my enemies triumph over me. Yea, let none that wait on thee be ashamed.
22 will be our song of invitation. Would you please bow with me? Dear Lord, thank you for this time that we're able to come together and join with our fellow brothers and sisters and learn more about your word and worship and sing praises unto you. We pray that you keep our hearts open and cheerful as we study and learn here tonight. We ask that you please be with those who could not be here tonight, Lord, that we want to thank you for those that you've placed your healing hand on, that they are continuing to improve. We ask that you continue to heal those that still need your healing hand on them. Be with those not only that we've mentioned, but that are on our hearts, whether it be cancer or other ailments they are dealing with, Lord. We pray that you help them and their caregivers to try to help to restore them to a much-needed state of health, that hopefully they can be back with us. Thank you for all the many blessings you've given us. Please let us use what we learn here tonight and apply it outside these doors so we can help bring others closer to you so that they too may have a chance of an eternal life with you. Thank you for all your many blessings. In Jesus' name, amen. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and open up to the book of Ephesians chapter 4. It has been a big week for us, a big couple of days. So yesterday, somebody decided that she finally wanted to walk. And so we are now stressfully buying locks for all our cabinets and reconsidering where we keep our chemicals. And so it's been a big day. But it's a big day when you take your first steps. You know, the world opens up to you in a way that it hasn't before, and there's things that you can do now that you couldn't do before. Yes, exactly. In the Bible, you have the term walking is used very often, and it refers to more than just a physical walk. It often refers to the life that you live, and it refers to the path and the choices that you make. In Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1, that's the sense in which Paul's using this word. Paul says, "I therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace." You know, there's all sorts of times throughout your life that you are going to fail. And certainly as babies get up and they walk, certainly they're going to fall down. They're going to fall down, and sometimes they'll pick themselves right back up, but sometimes they'll get a bruise and be injured, and it's not so much a quick stand-up as it is a slow limp. And sometimes I think that's the way we spiritually walk. You know, there's moments where we fall and we get right back up and get right back to it, but there's times that we fall and it's hard to get back into the swing of things. We start limping and we're struggling to get back where we once were. When you consider what Paul says here, you know, walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called. That's hard to do. We've been called to a great calling. As Christians, we've been called to live after the example of Christ and to do the things that he did and teach the things that he taught. And that's a very steep, difficult task to perform. You know, Christ was perfect, and I'm not. You know, Christ was, supernatural, and I'm not. There's many things that Christ was that I'm not, and you know, my weaknesses are made all the more apparent by his perfection. And yet Paul says, walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called. And here's how you do it. You know, walk with humility and with gentleness. That word gentleness also kind of contains the idea of, approachability. With patience, bearing with one another in love. eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. No. Maybe you failed in one of these areas. Maybe you failed in all of these areas. If you failed in walking in unity, then strive to make peace with others. If you failed to walk in humility, you've been prideful, well, learn to see yourself through the eyes of others and learn to see yourself through the eyes of God, and that humility will be hard-earned. As Christians, we fail. That's clear. We're not perfect. Being a Christian does not mean that temptation goes away, but we do have an obligation to strive to be better, to strive to walk after the one who called us. So this evening, if you're not a Christian and you would like to become one, let me encourage you to put Christ on in baptism. Maybe you are a Christian, but you've not been who you need to be, and you've perhaps failed in one or all of these aspects, and you need to restore your relationship with God. Let me encourage you to do that as well. If we can do anything for you, let me encourage you to come forward as we stand and sing. Dismiss our kids to or teachers to their classes. And our kids to their classes. It's hard to teach class when somebody's giggling at you and screaming at you and trying to get your attention. So I need you to stop it, John. Okay, well, if you got your Bibles, go ahead and open up to the book of Exodus. Exodus 24. So we've got this week, and we've got 2 more weeks after this, and then we'll be moving on to our spring series. So in the past, we've done our summer series, which we've kind of done in the summer months. We're moving over to quarter system starting in March, and so part of that, we're also moving from a summer series to a spring series. I know summer gets to be so busy for all of us, and we have a lot of people out during our summers, and so hopefully it'll be well attended. We've got a really good lineup of people from various churches who are going to come and speak. Our topic is going to be for such a time as this. and we're going to be addressing some of the cultural issues in our issues within our culture, issues within our churches, and how the church should be the solution to a lot of those issues. And so I think you'll find it to be relevant and timely, and so make plans to be here for those and to invite your friends and your neighbors and the people who are here on Sunday but aren't here right now. Be sure to invite them as well, and it'll be good for us. Exodus chapter 24. We've got 2 more weeks of Exodus, and we'll be wrapping it up. And so the only way to get through everything I want to get through is we're going to have to cover a lot of material today. We're going to mostly cover 24 and chapter 32. We're going to just kind of briefly skim those intervening chapters, and we'll get to it. So where we've left off, Moses was on Mount Sinai, and he has the word of the Lord has come to Moses. He gave the 10 Commandments in the presence of all of Israel, and then Moses was called up onto the mountain, and God gave Moses additional instruction, additional laws, to which Moses is then tasked with writing these things down and then communicating them to the Israelites. We talked a lot about the purpose of the law. Why does God give a law? Why is he giving these commandments, these laws? What's the purpose? Yeah, it protects people and it guides people. It teaches them about who God is and about what he expects of them, and how, if they want to have a relationship with him, here's how you do it. You got to do it in these avenues. You can't just have a relationship with God and do it however you see fit. God is a God who sets the terms, and so there's certainly an aspect of Israel developing a relationship with God that's important in these. I think it's also important, and I think sometimes we don't think of it this way as much because we are, in the Christian age. But this is setting a identity for these people. These are a group of people that are related by blood, kind of loosely at this point. These are generations apart from Abraham and the 12 patriarchs, but they are related by blood. But that's fairly loosely at this point. And so this is really tying them in to become a people. And it's going to give them laws and going to give them a society. And so that's very important. The laws are going to reflect the lawgiver. We're going to talk about that a little bit more today. But God is the one who gives these laws. And so by studying the words that he's given and the commandments he's given, we can understand who God is, right? A just God is a God who gives laws about justice. And so we see that there's laws about doing right to others, and there's laws about justice and righteousness and these things. And so we can infer from that God is a just God, and that's important. And so God is a God of justice and mercy and kindness and order and grace, and all of these things you can see in the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant. So this week, what we're going to see is the law is going to be confirmed. The covenant is going to be confirmed with the people. And then is going to be promptly broken. And so you don't have to hardly blink an eye before Israel's going to be breaking this covenant that they just promised God to keep. And so with that in mind, Exodus chapter 24, let's look at the confirmation of the law. Let's pick up and read these first 8 verses. Then he said to Moses, "Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship from afar. Moses alone shall come near to the Lord, but the others shall not come near, and the people shall not come up with them." Moses came and told the people all the words that the Lord had, all the words of the Lord and all the rules, or your translation may say judgments or ordinances, something along those lines. And all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words of the Lord has spoken, we will do. And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. He rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and the 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men off to the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half the blood and put it in basins, and half the blood he threw against the altar. He took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. And Moses took the blood and threw it on the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. So there's a lot of interesting things here. There's a lot of, I think, maybe a little bit of irony. Well, let's start off by talking about the words of the Lord. So God has spoken to Moses, and he's given all these commandments, and we kind of went through some of them, some of the highlights of some of these last week. Laws about what to do with sojourners in the land, and laws about Sabbath and holidays and that sort of thing. And so Moses gets off the mountain, and he's charged with writing these things down. And so he writes these things down. And so when we read through the books of Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, we're reading the books of Moses. Obviously not all of it has happened just yet, but Moses is going to be the one who writes these things, and he writes a lot of this kind of contemporaneously, right? He's writing these things probably right after they happened, or something along those lines, or not long after they happened. And so these are the books of Moses, because Moses wrote these books. The word rules is interesting. Look at verse 3. Moses came and told all the people all the words of the Lord and all the rules. The ESV says rules. I think the New King James, the King James say judgments. Some other translations say ordinances or laws or something along those lines. That's an interesting word. What is a rule? What is a law? What is a judgment? What are those things hinting at? What do they tell us about the things that God has given here? Yeah, it tells us that there is right and wrong, right? A judgment. Think about who gives judgments? Judges, right? What is the job of a judge? To differentiate what's right and what's wrong, to have discernment. And so when Moses is writing these things, these are the words of the Lord, but they're also judgments, or they're ordinances, or they're rules. They set boundaries on behaviors that are acceptable and unacceptable. And so, you can't have, in a lot of ways, you can't have freedom without laws, right? And that sounds kind of backwards. Sometimes we think of liberty as being able to do whatever you want to do, but that's not really true liberty. Liberty is having, freedom is having guidelines on behavior. Liberty is not permissive of everything, certainly not. If somebody were to, if we were to understand liberty as whatever you want to do, you have the freedom to do it, well, then that's not liberty at all, because what's liberty for one is not liberty for another. And so, anyway, all this to say, what Moses is giving here are judgments that set standards for behavior, for what is right and what is wrong. And so when we think about, the lawgiver, how the law reflects the lawgiver, God is a God of justice, and He is a God of order, and things that are there is a correct way to behave, and there are incorrect ways to behave. And so if you behave correctly, you have nothing to worry about, right? If you behave correctly under a law, then you don't have to worry about the consequences of breaking the law. But if you behave poorly and break the law, then you have an expectation of judgment. an expectation of punishment. And that's certainly how God operates. And we're going to see that, is that God has set now his standard of behavior for his people. And if they keep that, then they will be blessed. But if they break that, they have the expectation that there will be judgment. Things are not always just going to be able to slide. And so that's very important. We live in a world that doesn't like rules, right? We like to push the boundaries and we like to get our way. And I think this is a hard thing for a lot of people to understand and a lot of people to come to terms with, that you can't just live however you want to live if you want to have a relationship with God. And that's a timeless issue, because we're going to see, obviously, people in our society, in our world, struggle with that, but Israel's going to struggle with that, like, in a week or so. It's going to take just a couple weeks for Israel to really struggle with that. Any thoughts on that? I think it's interesting, Israel is real quick to respond. And so Moses gives these laws and these ordinances, and Israel immediately pipes up, and what do they say? Of course we'll do whatever you tell us to do. Sure, we'll do that. And then he sprinkles the blood on the covenant again, and then verse 7, and they say it again. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient. I find a little bit of irony in this. They're so quick to respond. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll be obedient. We can do that. Are they speaking a little too quickly? Maybe. Maybe they've not fully grasped what this law is going to be asking of them. There's a lot of things that God has said, and so far this is just a minute portion of all the laws that He's going to give, and they're excited. We'll do that. Remember the setting of where this is happening too. God is still dwelling on the mountain. The mountain's still on fire. His presence is still there, and just as terrifying as it was when He was speaking to the Ten Commandments. And so Israel, maybe they're a little intimidated too. They see the power of God, and they see that He's asking something of them, and they say, yeah, sure, we'll do it. We'll be obedient. Maybe not quite understanding the full severity of what they're actually agreeing to. Maybe they did. They had the law read to them, and so they know what's being said, but they're perhaps being a little too cavalier about it, about their ability to do it. Then you have this interesting, the covenant being sealed with blood. There's a whole bunch of animals that are sacrificed. Verse 5, He sent young men of the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. Moses took half the blood, put it in basins, and half the blood he threw against the altar. And then he sprinkles the other half out on the people and on the book of the covenant. That's a very evocative image, I guess. Well, what does that sound like? We see echoes of this throughout the Bible, right? What does this sound like elsewhere in the Bible? 1 Corinthians? Yeah. 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 It's Mark, and I don't think it's in Matthew, but I think Mark, Luke, and 1 Corinthians say something very, very similar to this. So when Jesus is having that last meal, that last supper, and He's instituting what comes to be known as communion, look at what's said. And He said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I say to you, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until the day in which I drink it new in the kingdom of God." And so that's a very evocative image, right? When Jesus is instituting the Lord's Supper, and He says, take and drink this cup, which is my blood of the covenant, poured out for the many. Does he say that by accident? No, he wants them to remember this story, right? This is the moment that Israel is being sealed in their covenant. God has promised to do great things for Israel if they keep their covenant, this covenant. And this is the point at which, the stamp is sealed, or the stamp is stamped, I guess, the seal is sealed, and now they're bound together in this sprinkling of the blood. And here, Jesus is saying, listen, this blood that I'm about to shed, that if you partake in, will be a seal of this new covenant for you. And so that's a very powerful image. Look over at Hebrews chapter 9. There's a lot of interesting sacrifice things here. In Hebrews chapter 9, verses 15 through 22, when we think of sacrifices in the Bible, in the Old Testament in particular, we think a lot about, the sacrifices of the Old Testament are sin sacrifices. And we think of the Day of Atonement where the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies and sprinkles blood on the Ark of the Covenant and all these sorts of things. What is the purpose of these sacrifices in the Old Testament? Why do them? What's the purpose? Yeah, there's a lesson in sacrifice by in of itself. You give up something of value. That's part of it. What does it accomplish? Or what is the sacrifices of the Old Testament? What do they accomplish? Cleansing, purity. Yeah. Respect. I hear people say a lot that these sacrifices were to absolve Israel of sins. And there's a sense in which these sacrifices are for sin and, purify Israel of sin. But in a fuller sense, these sacrifices do not take care of the problem of sin. They're like writing a check. If somebody gives you a check and says, you mow somebody's lawn, and they give you a check for however much you charged, and they say, here, take this, but don't cash it in until Friday or whatever. Have they paid for your... they have in a sense, but is not yet come to its fruition, to its fullness of the pay, has not yet happened. And so I think in a lot of ways that's analogous to these Old Testament sacrifices. So let's read Hebrews chapter 9. Yeah. Yeah, promise of payment to come. Yeah. And so in Hebrews chapter 9, the book of Hebrews draws an incredible amount from the books of Moses. And so if you want to have a good grasp of Hebrews, you have to have a good grasp of these books of Moses. Look at verse 15. Therefore, this is talking about Jesus, therefore he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since a death has occurred that redeems them from under the transgressions committed under the first covenant. So what's being said there? There's transgressions under the first covenant. You need a death to cover those things. Verse 16, for where a will is involved, the death of the one who made it must be established. For a will takes effect only at death, since it is not in force as long as the one who made is alive. Therefore, not even the first covenant was inaugurated without blood. For when every commandment of the law had been declared by Moses to the people, he took the blood of calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop and sprinkled it both on the book itself and on the people, saying, This is the blood of the covenant that God commanded you. And in the same way, he sprinkled it with the blood of both the tent and all of the vessels used in worship. Indeed, under the law, almost everything is purified with blood. And without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. So in a sense, blood is required for the forgiveness of sins. Blood is required for the, absolution, the absolving of sins. But then you read, you skip down to like Hebrews chapter 10, and you read 1 through 4. For since the law has but a shadow of good things to come instead of the true form of these realities, it can never, by the same sacrifices that are continually offered every year, make perfect those who draw near. Otherwise, would they not have ceased to be offered, since the worshipers, having once been cleansed, would no longer have any consciousness of sin? But in these sacrifices there is a reminder of sins every year, for it's impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. And so what he's saying is, listen, the sacrifices that were made, they're a shadow of a true reality that is to come. They don't make people perfect. They don't cleanse fully. Otherwise, why are they making these yearly sacrifices? You wouldn't need to make them every year. You need to make just one sacrifice and be done. But the reality is they're not sufficient. The blood of bulls and goats does not take away sins. It does not remove them. What it does is it pushes them forward. And so then you get to passages like Romans chapter 3. I know this is a tangent, but stick with me. Romans chapter 3, and you read verses 23 through 26. The righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all those who believe. For there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and are justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Jesus Christ, whom God put forward as a propitiation by his blood to be received by faith. This was to show God's righteousness, because in his divine forbearance, he passed over former sins. It was to show his righteousness at the present time, that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. And so here you have what's being said is that the sacrifice that is effective, the sacrifice that is able to take away sins completely, is the sacrifice of Jesus. And in times where the sins were pushed forward, Jesus has redeemed. And so Jesus is the sacrifice for all of the sins of the past and all of the sins of the future. He is the final sacrifice. He is the propitiation. That word's one of those weird words that we only use here and a couple other places in the Bible. But what that means is, your translation may say propitiation, it may say atoning sacrifice, it may say expiation even. What those words mean, a propitiation means a sacrifice that appeases the wrath of God. And an expiation means a sacrifice that incurs the grace of God. And so what Paul is saying here is a word that means both. He says, Jesus is the sacrifice that resolves the wrath of God, and he's also the sacrifice that brings about the grace of God. And so Jesus can do what the sacrifices of the Old Testament cannot do, which is truly once and for all absolve sin. Does that make sense, or is that a bunch of rambling? Any questions about that? Yeah.
Symbolism in the Bible is critical in some places. And in the old law, there's a lot said about spilling the blood and the consequences.
Mm-hmm.
They were told that they couldn't eat blood.
Yeah.
God said it was life to eat blood. Now, we would centuries and centuries later understand that, yes, blood is important for us to live. But the real life of blood is when Christ was sacrificed, when the blood of this man gave us everlasting.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and you go to like passages like 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 24, where it talks about Jesus bears the guilt of sins in his own flesh. He is the one who absolves sin. The guilt of sin was laid upon him. Not that he, was a sinner, but he bore the guilt of sin. And Hebrews 9, the part that we didn't read, just to save a little bit of time, talks about, he's the sacrifice that was the once and for all sacrifice. We don't need the sacrifices of bulls and all these sorts of things continually, because he was a sufficient sacrifice for all time. So this is difficult, some difficult stuff, but some very important stuff. This covenant that Moses established ultimately points towards the greater reality, which is Jesus. And so you see all these sacrifices and all these laws and all these things that reveal something about God, only to be more fully realized in Jesus. Any other thoughts, comments? All right. Well, let's move on. Chapter 24, verses 9 through 18. Then Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and 70 of the elders of Israel went up. And they saw the God of Israel. There was under his feet, as it were, a pavement of sapphire stones, or translation may say lapis lazuli, or azuli, or whatever. I don't know how you say it. Like the very heaven for clearness. But he did not lay his hand on the chief men and the people of Israel. They beheld God and ate and drank. And the Lord said to Moses, "Come up to the mountain and wait there, that I may give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandments that I have written for their instruction." So Moses rose and with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up to the mountain of God, and he said to the elders, wait here for us until we return to you. And behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a dispute, let him go to them. Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain, and the glory of the Lord dwelt on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And on the seventh day he called to Moses out of the midst of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel. Moses entered the cloud and went up in the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. So you have an interesting scene here. So Moses and Aaron's sons and 70 of the elders of Israel go up, and they see God. Well, what's the deal with that? Can God be seen? You have some passages that seem to suggest no. Exodus 33, verse 20. Flip over there a little bit. This is when Moses is he's speaking with God, and he says, God says, "But," he said, "you cannot see my face, for a man shall not see me and live." John 1, verse 18. Flip over in the New Testament, and you have a statement. John 1:18 is a very important verse. No one has ever seen God. Well, there you go. The only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. That's an interesting verse. No one's ever seen God. And then, following on that thought, the only God, who is Jesus here, Jesus is being called God, who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. So Jesus has made the Father known. And that's what you see also in John 14, which is an interesting passage. Jesus makes the statement that if you've seen him, you've seen God. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. And Philip said to him, "Lord, show us the Father, and it's enough for us." And Jesus said, "Have I been with you so long, and you still don't know me, Philip? Whoever's seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, 'Show us the Father'?" And so, you got some interesting things here. No one's ever seen God and lived. You shall not see the Lord and live. John 1:18, no one's ever seen God. So can God be seen? Well, no. Then you have the caveat, well, you've seen him through Jesus, and so that's interesting. We'll come back to that. But then you have some passages that suggest, well, yes, question mark. In Exodus chapter 24, what we just read, you have Moses, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, 70 of the elders. In Genesis 33, you have right after, Exodus 33 rather, right after God says, no one can see me and live, God passes before Moses, and he sees the back of Moses. So what's going on there? Genesis chapter 18, you have the story of right before Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed, an angel of the Lord comes to Abraham, and Abraham addresses the angel as Yahweh, which is the personal name of Jesus, or of God. Isaiah chapter 6, you have Isaiah in a vision, goes to the throne room of God. It says, I beheld the Lord. So what is it? Can God be seen or can he not? Is this a contradiction? Is the Bible contradicting itself here? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's hitting on it. So what's actually happening? Here's your fancy word for the day, a theophany. And that word just means, the first part, thea, is like the word God, and ophany is like an appearance, like a epiphany kind of thing. And so a theophany is an appearance of God. And you have several of these throughout Scripture. You have several theophanies. And so what you have here is one of these. But that doesn't really help, I guess. A couple things to keep in mind. God is spirit, right? John, in John, when Jesus is talking to the woman at the well, God is spirit. Who must ever worship him must worship in spirit and truth. As a spirit, can God be seen by eyes? No, because what are eyes? Material, right? Flesh and blood. The spirit is not flesh and blood. And so you see things that exist in a material world. You can't see things that don't exist in a material world. So God is spirit, and so he cannot be seen in a sense. And when we speak about God, we often talk about him in anthropomorphisms. So I guess I had two words for you. An anthropomorphism is giving human attributes to a non-human thing. So like, if I had a rock and I set the rock here and I said, see that rock standing there? No, the rock's not standing anywhere, right? Or, if you have a rabbit and the rabbit's making noises and you say, oh, that little rabbit's talking. Rabbits don't talk. And so whatever it might, you assign human-like characteristics to a non-human thing. And when we talk about God, we have to do that to a certain degree. Because how can we who are human and flesh and blood understand that which is spirit? And so when God passes before Moses, what does Moses see? He sees his back, right? Well, does God have a back? No, God doesn't have a back. You hear passages in Bible that talk about, the hand of God or the finger of God. Does God have hands and have fingers? Well, no, because he's a spirit. He's not flesh and blood. Here's my favorite Hebrew idiom. When you have passages like God being long-suffering, you have several of those in the Hebrew Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, what's literally said there is God is long-nosed. That's the Hebrew idiom that means long-suffering. He's got a long nose. Does God have a nose? No, because he's a spirit. And so, in a sense, you can see something, but what you're not seeing is truly not God in his fullness. And so you can experience in part, but not in full. And so what Moses sees is a bit of the glory of God, but he doesn't truly see God. No one can do that and live. And up to this point, all of Israel has seen the presence of God, or at least the glory of God, right? God dwells on the mountain, and he comes down upon the mountain, and they see that. But they're not seeing God in his fullness, in of himself. Does that make sense? You have something, Charlie? Yeah. 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 The Transfiguration is an interesting event. Jesus demonstrates his godhood there to an extent, but even there, you don't have people seeing the fullness of God in of itself, in of himself. It's not. Yeah. No, there's not the fullness of God is not being experienced there. Yeah, they saw Jesus, Elijah, and Moses.
Moses and Elijah, it says, and suddenly a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him." So they didn't actually see God, but they heard his voice in the Transfiguration.
Yeah.
I'm still.
Yeah.
There was somebody there that they recognized as God. And I don't want to be a problem here.
You're not a problem, Charlie. You're right in that. It's really can be simplified.
Yeah.
By reasoning in Genesis. God made man in his what? His own what? Image. Okay? If we can take that mindset of the image, the likeness, the liken unto, the as, when you see something that refers to God, it was like it is,
Yeah.
or such and and there is imagery and figurative language involved when the person of God is being discussed. It's not literal that you're seeing exactly God in his fullness. That's impossible. If you were to see God in his fullness, it would be instantaneous death because of what the scriptures say. But the image of God is many things. One of the things is what Charlie's talking about in the Transfiguration. The likeness, the image of God. And that's what Jesus becomes. And if we can try to wrap our mind in that very simple statement when it says, God made man in his own image. So,
Yeah.
I hope that.
Yeah. And you get to a point that there is an inexpressibility to it. And that's the challenge is, you cannot comprehend God in God's fullness. It can't happen. There's too many things that are different between who and what you are and who and what God is. And so that's why when we talk about God, we talk about him in anthropomorphic terms. We talk, like Tom was saying, and we talk about God as having hands, and we talk about God as having, a back, because that's the only way we can understand anything about God is because, we have to put it in terms that we can grasp. We can't grasp what it is to be a truly full spirit in the sense that God is spirit, because that's just not a perspective that we have. And so when God communicates to people, he condescends and speaks in terms that we can have some familiarity with. And so if you were to experience God in his fullness, in his totality, well, you couldn't bear that. And no one has done that. And so Jesus, when he talks in John 14, he says, listen, if you want to know who God is, know who I am. Because Jesus is God who took on flesh, incarnate. And so if you've seen Jesus, you've seen God. But you still have not seen the fullness of God in the sense of the spiritual nature of God. That makes sense.
Kind of like looking at a photograph of someone.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not looking at them because they may not be present.
Yeah.
But you're looking at that image of them in the likeness.
Yeah. 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 And so we're not going to even get close to it. Look at all these things that I had thought about talking about. So real quick, chapter 32, we'll just summarize it. You know the story probably pretty well. They create Aaron in the midst of all of this. Aaron creates a golden calf and says, behold, this is the God who has led you out of Egypt. The problem is, that's not the God who led him out of Egypt. God is not an idol. And so any attempt at idolatry, part of the problem is idols can't grasp who God is. And so it is a insult to him to say that God is a calf. He is so much greater. And so that's a part of the problem. Also, verse 6 is interesting in chapter 32. And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings to the calf, by the way. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. So there's really two sins here that's taking place. You have the idolatry sin, and then you have a sexual sin. And so that rose up to play is a euphemism. It's actually used in the same word is used in the same sense, talking about Isaac and Rachel, and also Ishmael and Isaac, which is its own separate issue. But it's a sexual sin that's being taken place here. And so there's idol worship accompanied by sexual sins, and Moses comes down, sees this, and is outraged. And God is outraged. And God says, I'm just going to wipe them out. It has been 40 days since we established this covenant, give or take a couple, I might have miscounted, but and they're already turning. This is ridiculous. And Aaron tries to minimize his responsibility. He says, well, those people they told me to do this, and so I just listened to them, and I threw all that gold in the fire, and out came a calf. And so he tries to minimize his responsibility here. But Israel's sin has some serious ramifications. God sends a plague on the people. Verse 35, then the Lord sent a plague on the people because they had made the calf, the one that Aaron made. Just to make sure we know that Aaron made it. And Israel's going to learn some ramifications. There's going to be a lot of deaths because of this. And so, Israel started out so hopeful. Yeah, we'll do it. We'll keep this covenant. We'll be obedient. Not even 2 months pass. And here they are, idol worshiping and all sorts of issues. So I know we covered a whole lot of stuff, and I know a lot of that was kind of confusing, and it's deep theological things that are hard to understand, but very important. If you got questions, come see me afterwards, and we can talk about it a little bit more. Thank you.